don't be afraid of hormones, but don't be afraid of getting into the weight room
Yeah.
and learning how to do some of these basic movements, the squats and a bench press. I think women can lift heavy. You got to build up to it and you got to do it with proper form. And it'll be amazing once you get started.
Welcome to the Peak Health Podcast, where we explore how everyday choices impact our health in profound ways. Today, we're tackling some vital questions that resonate with many women out there. Are there gender-specific guidelines for strength training? Is cardiovascular training or strength training more beneficial for women? And how can women balance their hormones to optimize their health? Joining us to provide expert insights on these topics is Laura Alexander. With her extensive background as a functional medicine pharmacist combined with her experience as a certified personal trainer, Laura is uniquely qualified to address these issues. Tune in as she helps us understand these complex health issues and offers practical advice for every woman looking to enhance their well-being. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, so good to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And we were just chatting prior to the podcast. I remember meeting you at IHS, which is the Integrative Health Symposium, which was in New York. And we were talking about your experience and how you transformed yourself from being someone who I think you described yourself as the cardio queen, someone who
Yeah.
just focused on cardiovascular training routines all the time, and then you realized the importance of strength training. So maybe we can start with that. Just tell us a bit about your background and how you went in that direction, and then we can talk about hormone balance after that.
Yeah, I love to talk about that because because I feel so much better not running all the time. But I mean, just as a young girl, I guess, I don't know if I just didn't get the message that women can lift weights too, but even into college, I just thought, well, this is the way I have to stay skinny, is to run on the treadmill, to do a lot of cardio. I didn't know how to lift weights. I thought if I did, I would like look bulky. I mean, I used to say I don't really want to look like a man, which is just such a myth that like I really want to bust that for everybody.
And yeah,
But I
it's
was
such a,
to the
I'll just
point,
interject just here just really quickly, because that's such a common misconception, is that women
yes,
will look like men and they'll be very
yes,
bulky when they weight lift. And it's so not the case. It's almost
it's not the case.
it's impossible
Yeah,
to
not
happen.
at all.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. And so I was to the point where I was running. I mean, I was running so much and eating maybe 1,200 calories, and I
Wow.
felt so horrible. And at the time, my husband at the time, he was on a weight loss journey, but I just wanted to feel better. And we both became personal trainers to figure that out, I guess. And I stopped running and started lifting weights and eating more. That was a huge piece of it too.
Right.
So going from 1,200 calories to 1,800, maybe 2,000 some days, and lifting weights. And I actually did lose weight and I lost 2 pants sizes, but my body just transformed.
So let me ask you this. So you had the misconception that, like just running and, just focusing on those endurance types of exercises is all you needed. And
Right.
your goal at that point was just to maintain health, not
Yeah.
necessarily to to lose weight, or was
Right.
it lose
No.
weight?
Yeah, it
Just to
wasn't.
maintain health.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was just to feel better, really. I like to exercise, but the running was just breaking me down. I felt
Yeah.
like I had no energy. And I almost thought I don't like the term, but I guess it's a term people know, skinny fat, where
Yes.
I was just like, I had no definition. I felt very weak.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't like that feeling. And starting to lift weights I mean, I just felt like a total different person. I
And
felt
how much were
strong,
you running?
confident.
How much were you running back when you were
Almost every day,
okay?
almost every day, and doing marathons, half marathons.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um,
You're really pushing yourself.
it was a lot.
Mm.
Yeah,
Okay. So yeah,
it was
so I just want to weigh in here on, the importance of endurance training. So there is certainly data supporting endurance training, and that, I would say more cardiovascular care and exercise, and that you want to exert yourself to a certain degree. The ACC put out a statement that 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week, is of walking, like, of intense
Mhm.
walking, is really what you need to maintain your or improve your cardiovascular status or have the most benefit of exercise in improving your cardiovascular status. And that's really, that gives you, if you look at the data, that gives you most of the benefit. It's just that amount of training alone.
Mhm.
Now you can do more, obviously, and we can talk more about that in just a bit. But when you push yourself to levels like you did, like with marathons and things like that, it's actually it's not healthy. It actually becomes a stress.
Yes.
It becomes a
Yeah.
stress on your system. It's not doesn't mean that like every time you push yourself to run more, you're gonna get a benefit. Actually, it could have the opposite effect. And it sounds like that's what you experienced.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely what was happening for sure. It was too much stress, too much breaking down. And so I still run because I don't think running is bad. And I actually enjoy it now because it's maybe 3 miles at a time. It's not 10, it's not 12, 15 pushing it. But the bulk of my exercise routines are really the weightlifting, and then I do yoga and stretching too, of course, that's like all part of it. But I find that that's more helpful for me, and I think a lot of women get into the point where they're overdoing it, that the cardio becomes a stressor,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't become health, it's disease promoting, especially in the age where I'm at now, the perimenopause age, where we're already, just because of the fluctuation in estrogen, we already have higher levels of cortisol, higher levels of adrenaline. We really don't need to continue to push those levels.
Right.
And that's where the strength training comes in.
Absolutely. And I just, I love this book. You may have read it, Peter Attia's book on longevity that recently came out. And, what he says is that one of the best predictors of longevity is your VO2 max and your grip strength. So
Mhm.
there's two things. It's your VO2 max is related to how much endurance exercise you do. And to improve your VO2 max, you really have to stay in zone two for like for a certain amount of time per week to start maybe 30 minutes, twice a week or something like that, and then maintaining that. And that's where endurance training comes in. But then grip strength is the second part where, that's where strength training comes in. Because you can imagine like, and as you experienced, when you are not lifting heavy weights, you're just running all the time, you're eating low caloric intake, you're using all those calories to move, there's nothing left for your
Right.
so that your body can grow and develop, and as you mentioned, you're just like kind of your muscles sort of withered away. You're
Yeah.
kind of the skinny fat appearance. Okay, so that was the way you were previously, and then how did you decide to eat more then and weight train? Like how did that
Um,
progression?
Actually, that was my ex-husband that helped me figure that out because I didn't even know. I didn't track my food. I never even thought to, but
Yeah,
he did over the course of a day. And basically, it just opened my eyes. Because he said, "Do you realize how like little that you actually eat?"
yeah,
And I had no idea,
yeah,
really. And part of that was not being prepared, but also working really long hours as a pharmacist and maybe only having like one meal break and a 12 or 14-hour day, which is insane now. And I don't let that happen, actually. I now am prepared and I take my breaks, I have my food. Because
yeah,
even if I can't leave the pharmacy, I make sure to get a break. But at that point in my younger years, I would say, I just would be so stressed that I can't leave the bench, like, I have so much going on, and now it's just my health is my priority, so I will step away, I will go have my snack, I will sit down and eat my lunch.
yeah. And I think another misconception that people have is that they can't eat carbs, right? And I don't know
Yeah.
if that was going on with you during that time, but it was like, like, okay, you got to eat a minimal amount. You can't eat carbs. You got to be in this ketotic state. And it really depends on what your goals are. Like being
Mhm.
in a ketotic state is not necessary for health. A low carb diet is not necessary for health.
Right.
You can still eat carbohydrates. Now, as long as they're complex carbohydrates, healthy carbohydrates, not the simple, processed stuff. It's natural. Then it's fine. There's no problem with it. In fact, when you're weight training, like you mentioned, it's helpful to have carbohydrates. You need
Mhm.
those. You need those carbohydrates to increase your glycogen stores so that you can lift heavier weights,
Yeah.
that you can build muscle.
It's funny that you bring that up because I recently I had to totally revamp what I was doing. And a lot of it, I think, is because of the age that I'm at and some of the things that I'm dealing with hormonally. But probably for the last year, I was exercising fasted and I was very low carb. And I realized, the strength gains that I'd had were just dwindling. And it was really just like, oh God, what is going on? And then I realized when I originally started lifting weights and when I felt really great, I never lifted weights on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
I'd go 30 minutes after I had breakfast, or it would be in the afternoon, like I'd already had a good lunch. And I realized, like, well, gosh, I don't have the energy. Like, I
Yeah.
need the energy. So I just started doing very simple things. If I'm going to do something that I think maybe I'll have some GI upset, I just have a protein shake. And that
Yes.
is like, I mean, it's just blown me away, like just the difference of having food on board.
Yes.
And if I can, I have my full breakfast and then I go and lift weights, or I definitely wait until the afternoon where I've had, 2 meals at least. And then right after the workout, I'll have like a little protein shake.
Yeah.
And I feel so much better.
Yeah. That's another great point in that, people also look at intermittent fasting as
Mhm.
a way to, or time restricted eating as a way to, decrease the caloric intake and lose weight. And it is beneficial. I mean, people
Right.
certainly can get benefit out of that. But again, a lot of this depends on your goals, right?
Mhm.
So if your goals are to build muscle or build mass or increase your muscle mass, then intermittent fasting and specifically eating or exercising in a fasted state is not really beneficial,
Yeah.
because you have depleted, some of your energy stores overnight. You've depleted that glycogen store. You don't have amino acids circulating in your system, and you're sort of lifting weights. You're breaking down muscle, and you're hoping to repair it to, in a way that builds mass, and that's harder for your body to do.
Right.
Now, if you're kind of been in this place for a while, if you're like a seasoned weight trainer, you can probably lift fasted and just eat, immediately afterwards, like an hour afterwards, and you'd be fine. But I certainly would say that if you're in the starting this journey, eating before working out is
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
And I think men too are a little bit different. I don't think it matters so much with men, but I will say just as I've gotten older, I mean, the way I work out, even though I'm still lifting weights, other things have to change. And you know, that's what I try to help any client that comes to me. It's like thinking about where you are now. If you're perimenopausal, your stress is already a little bit high. So how can we affect that so that you get more return for, your money, your time when you're in there lifting weights? And it worked for me for a long time to be fasted, but
Yeah.
it's not working anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once I hit 41, things kind of started to change for me. So it's been pretty crazy though to see the difference with just adding that in.
Yeah. And I
And I
think
do find protein, like pushing the protein for me is a tremendous help as well. When I undereat protein, I don't feel well in
yeah.
general.
Yeah, the recommendation is 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight is sort of the amount that you should take, especially if you're considering building muscle. And eating protein is very important because you can imagine, like, what is the building block of, muscle? It's amino acids, right? And amino acids form protein chains, and that's what you need. These actin myosin fibrils that make up your muscle are composed of protein. If you don't have that on board, you're not going to build muscle. So
Mhm.
that's extremely important. But it's interesting what you said. You said men and women are different, and I think that's what women are looking for. Like, what is the difference there? What is the
I
difference?
think the difference, I mean, we all have the capability to build muscle, and women are not going to look like men, even if they lift super, super heavy, because we don't have as much testosterone. So it's
Yeah.
not going to happen. I mean, I've been lifting heavy for probably 6 or 7 years now, and I still don't look. So that is, the myth busted there. But just thinking in terms of when you're eating, and I think even fasting in general, if we leave out the exercise piece, from what I've read and just talking with other women as well in this age group, trying to push the fasting window to 18 hours. Although men do really, really well on that, women do not do very well on that over a period of time, maybe initially 3, 4 months, but bringing that window back down to like say 12 or 14, I think is pretty ideal for most women. But having the breakfast and having more protein with that, because I still, almost every single woman that I've ever talked with under eats protein.
Yeah.
Um, it's just I don't know if we don't think about it. I was one. I rarely ever ate protein, and I was doing all that running, but it just wasn't something that I went after, I guess, in
Yeah.
terms of food. But getting women at least the 1-to-1 ratio that you were talking about, but
Yeah.
maybe even a little bit more than that, and just depending on how you're feeling. Are you full? Like, do you feel like your your blood sugar isn't, like, spiking? And I think that women do better about fueling in that window, fueling with breakfast and then fueling right after too, especially in that perimenopause window.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there is this sort of trend now for people to intermittent fast. And
Mm,
as we mentioned, it's certainly beneficial because the way it works is you're basically decreasing your overall caloric intake. There's a lot of times, as we all know, as we're not hungry, we're just like feel the need to munch on something. And by intermittent fasting, you are not doing that. You can also decrease your caloric intake by restricting certain foods. There's like three real main ways to lose weight. Is one, or techniques you can use. One is intermittent fasting, as we discussed, or time restricted eating. The other is decreasing, like a certain type of food. Like if you eat a ton of bread, you're like, okay, I'm going to
yeah.
stop eating bread. And that may be, if your caloric intake of bread is so high, that may be all you need to do to
Mhm.
lose weight. And the third way to do it is to make sure your total caloric intake is less than your total daily energy expenditure. And that's the easiest way to do that is to eat more protein, because protein causes satiety. In order to digest protein, it requires extra energy, so that you're actually using up energy to digest it itself. And you're going to find that, like, you just don't want to eat as much when you're eating adequate protein. And you can still be we're not saying you have to be like a carnivore only, to be healthy. You can do this as a vegetarian, as a vegan. All you can do that. You're just going to have to take more processed stuff, but just having that protein intake is super important.
Yeah, and I mean, it to me, it gets easier and easier the more that you do it, and just having the veggies with the protein, and just always making that the base of every meal. Even at breakfast, I will have vegetables, cooked greens, really anything, okra. Like, I'll come up with anything for breakfast as long as I'm getting my veggies in. So it is doable to do that, and I feel better when I do eat breakfast and I break that fast, and that's been, of course, a recent change with the perimenopause stuff, but
So going back to your story, you switched over to weight training
mhm,
from just the endurance training,
yeah.
and you were eating more, and you said you felt a whole lot better. Like, what kind of changes did you notice?
Oh, I had energy. I mean, I didn't, and I had less stress too. It was
Okay.
amazing how stressed I even got stressed, like, knowing I had to exercise. Okay, gosh, I need to run 10 miles today. I don't even feel like I could run 2 miles. And it just became this vicious cycle of having to run and running and stress. And then when I finally stepped back, it's like, oh, okay, I can go for 30 minutes and take a rest, lift some weights, take a rest, even sometimes to the point where I may not even sweat during a workout. And I actually thought, if you're not sweating, then you're not working out. That's the way
Yeah.
I used to think.
Right.
But now, depending on how cold the garage is, because I lived out in my garage, I may not sweat that much.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel it the next day, the muscles being a little bit sore. But yeah, the energy was better. And I just felt like I looked better. I felt like
Yeah.
I looked healthier.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you know,
that's the thing, when women lift, as we discussed, you're not going to get big. You're just going to get toned.
yeah.
And your joint pains are going to start going away.
Mhm.
You're just going to feel better, just carrying yourself around. You're going to look better, you're going to feel more confident. There's so many benefits to weight training, not only just in terms of your total health and your longevity, but just how you feel on a daily basis.
I love what you said about feeling confident because I think that probably was the number one thing that happened to me. I mean, I just felt so, I guess, sure of my body at that point because I knew how to move. I watched how to do the exercises, and that was a little bit before I became a personal trainer, but understanding how my body is moving, feeling balanced, making sure I'm doing like one-legged exercises so that I'm still working on my balance, and just knowing like, well, I could just go lift that if I wanted to. I could go lift that bag of dog food and, carry it out of the store. I don't need a cart. Just little things like that that just make you feel so good. Like I can do it. I'm not weak. I am strong. I am capable.
Put that bag in the overhead bin.
Right.
Thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, that's tough for a lot of people. It's hard
Hmm.
to do. And you always need, many people just need to ask for help, but just imagine just being independent enough to not even worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
I feel like one of my worst fears was always getting older and not being able to move, not being able to lift something, not being able to lift up a grandkid. I'm far from that right now, I will say, but that's something that I want to be able to do. Like I
yeah.
want to be able to throw them up in the air and play. It's just, and that's the muscle part.
Yes.
And not sarcopenia. That is something that I definitely don't want to have. And
Yeah.
uh,
And that's, yeah. And to those of you that don't know, sarcopenia is just a loss of muscle mass. And that just happens naturally with age. And we all will lose muscle mass. It's just part of the aging process, but you can significantly decrease that loss by heavy weight training and
yeah.
eating protein. That's the
Yeah.
key. If you do that, you can maintain your muscle mass even as you age.
And I think what you said, heavy weightlifting, because I do think there's another myth out there for women when they do, even when they do get in the weight room, sometimes I'll see it's just a very lightweight and like 20 reps. And that really doesn't give a good enough signal for that muscle growth. And we're talking about getting stronger and also impacting the central nervous system too, to be able to actually lift that. You want to push to the heaviest that you can with proper form. And the key is proper form because you don't want to hurt yourself. But we also need to push each other, staying at 3 to 5 reps. That's my new, I guess, probably my 12-week plan for now for the next couple months is staying at that 3 to 5 rep range and
Yeah.
really trying to see how heavy that I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is key, lifting heavy. And, I was doing that for some time, but I realized that lifting 3 to 5 reps for me was just creating too much joint pain.
Mhm.
So then I decreased the amount of weight, but I still lifted to the point where I had, 1 to 3 RIR in the tank, and
Yeah,
RIR stands for repetitions in reserve. And that's where you want to be. You want to
yeah.
be at the point where you're just like, I can only do one more. I can't, or two more. I can't do any more. And then you stop.
Then you
You don't
stop.
necessarily
Yes.
have to lift a failure because you will have what they call a technical failure, meaning that you will lose form, you
Right.
get injured. You don't want that, but you want
Yeah.
to lift to the last point where you can be
Yeah.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, and I never advocate to lift to failure. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't, we don't really need to be doing that if we're talking about just overall health.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So we spoke about, endurance training, cardio training versus weight training, how there is certainly benefit to weight training and the importance of it. And, I'd venture to say that, like, if you had to choose, like, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to choose one, but if you did, I would personally choose weight training
Yes.
over
Yeah,
cardio
I
because you can
definitely
get
would.
some of that in weight training
Yeah.
as
You
well.
can. I mean, you can absolutely make a weight routine more cardio. I mean, I did that yesterday with some lunges,
Yeah,
heavy lunges. My heart rate got to 170. So, I mean, I was pushing it. So you absolutely you can do that while you're also going for strength too.
absolutely. Okay, so now let's go to hormone balancing because
Yeah.
that's another question a lot of women have is, like, hey, look, I'm premenopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, or just in general, I just, I think my hormones are off. Like, just can you just tell us what that is? What is hormone imbalance?
Yeah, yeah. So if we're talking about specifically the perimenopause age, which are the years leading up to menopause when you no longer have, which is defined as no longer having a period for 12 months, then you are considered to be menopausal. And the perimenopause years can start at age 35 and last all the way up until, menopause. And during those times, your estrogen, people think of it as just a huge loss of estrogen, when really it's more estrogen chaos. You have a lot of fluctuations in estrogen levels between different cycles. But the main thing that you really start to lose is your progesterone. And that really starts to go down first. And women that have other conditions are more at risk for that happening earlier. So in the case of if you have PCOS, if you have infertility issues, let's see, any kind of estrogen dominance, if you've been told that you had that, or insulin resistance, you're more likely to have less progesterone relative to estrogen. And then that's where you really start to see a lot of side effects like the hot flashes or the mood imbalances, because you don't have that progesterone that's there to specifically balance your estrogen. For my personal story, and I really don't mind sharing it at all because it's kind of why I'm here and why I got into some of the different hormone balancing aspects of health, but I was never able to have children. So I have endometriosis, and I don't want to say ovarian failure because nobody diagnosed me with that, but that's kind of what I believe happened. So my progesterone is already kind of in the tank. And so I've started to realize I am having some of these mood imbalances, but what really does help is the progesterone supplementation. And that's usually what you go for first because you want to get that back on board to protect your tissues from too much estrogen, because estrogen's great and we need it. We need it for cardiovascular health, we need it for bone health. But when it's not balanced with progesterone, then you get proliferation of tissues like breast tissue and your uterine tissue. So even when we're talking about cancer risk, progesterone is there to protect us. So that's kind of the thing I start with first is where is the progesterone? What's going on with it?
Okay, so people that present to you, typically they'll have some kind of symptoms, hormone imbalance. And you
Yeah.
mentioned like hot flashes, night sweats, mood changes. What other symptoms do women typically have?
Just sometimes low libido for sure, and feeling fatigue as well.
Okay.
That's a big one, or even hair loss too.
Okay. And then menstrual
Yeah.
irregularities, maybe skin changes, things like that. Okay.
Mhm.
So those are the symptoms that women have. Then they present themselves. And then do you typically, and we discussed some of the hormones. Do you measure, do a hormone panel and check
Yeah.
hormones? Is that how?
I do. So we can have where the doctor will test like blood levels, which is fine. I like some of the saliva tests that measures like the metabolites or the breakdown of our hormones in urine or saliva. There's a couple different tests that you can do. And I'll use all of that data put together with the symptoms to make a recommendation. Some women, depending on the age, we don't really even I don't worry about testing first to get you started on progesterone. If you're in your 40s, mid 40s, and you're starting to present with a lot of these symptoms, I just do progesterone to get them started, and then we'll maybe do a test down the road to see what estrogen is doing. But that's where we usually get started.
So the hormones what are the hormones that you test?
The main ones are estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and DHEA. I will like to sometimes throw on a cortisol level too, because if women either too high cortisol or too low can also cause adrenal dysfunction as well as impact your thyroid. I also like to know an insulin level. A lot of times I'll get the patient or the customer to request an insulin level from the doctor, as well as a full thyroid panel too.
Okay. Okay. So estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, thyroid hormones,
Mhm.
cortisol, and insulin are the
Yeah.
ones that you're looking at. Okay, great. So somebody presents with the symptoms, you get the panel of hormones, and based on the patterns that you see, you decide whether and their symptoms,
Yeah.
whether it's beneficial to prescribe replacement therapy or not.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned progesterone is sort of like the most common one you go to. Is that like if you would say somebody's in the perimenopause space and they feel like there's something wrong, you check a hormone panel. Is that like typically the first one that you prescribe is progesterone?
Yeah. Yeah, especially when they still have their period
Yeah.
and they're not menopausal yet, because we know that estrogen's still very chaotic, and
Okay.
it's usually not the case that estrogen is rock bottom. It's usually the progesterone that's rock bottom.
And when they do take that, how does that make them feel in general?
So much better. I mean, I've had so many clients that are like, "Okay, my energy is back. The mood is huge." And also sleep. Progesterone helps just relax us, and so that affects your sleep as well. And I've had one client that lost a tremendous amount of weight as well with just doing the progesterone. She was very, very estrogen dominant.
Yeah.
Her skin started to clear up. That was pretty amazing.
Amazing. Okay. So and how long do they stay on it for?
Forever.
Okay. So you just have a
I don't
lifetime.
like to say I guess there's different schools of thought on that, and then people are still really scared about the cancer piece of hormone replacement, but my thoughts are when you go through menopause and your ovaries stop producing estrogen and progesterone, your adrenals are the ones that make those hormones. And if we have an overall burden of stress in our life, your adrenals are kind of prioritizing cortisol and not so much our sex hormones.
Right.
So I think it depends, really. It
Yeah.
should probably always be depends is the answer.
Yeah.
It depends on the woman and, how she feels. After menopause, estrogen therapy is really an add-on because we know that helps with cardiovascular risk, osteoporosis risk. And we keep the progesterone, especially if you still have a uterus, because progesterone is protective against uterine cancer.
Okay. Yeah, and a lot of the conclusions that they came to with the Women's Health Initiative that was done, 20 years ago or so
Yeah.
were found to be false.
Yes.
They didn't use bioidentical hormone replacement. There were so many issues with that
Yeah.
study. So I remember actually when I was in residency, they blasted that study and completely shifted the way perimenopausal women are treated, and it did women such a disservice.
It did.
Yeah.
It did, and that's still happening today. And I have to have those conversations with women, that especially about that trial or that study. I read a book called Estrogen Matters. Have you ever read that
I
book?
haven't, no.
I can't remember the author, but it really broke that study down, that clinical trial down into ways that you could understand how the data was so skewed for one thing. And they also used the cohort was the women were, I want to say, 10 or 15 years past menopause, and they already had some cardiovascular issues, which I thought was incredibly interesting. So that cohort of women really aren't the people that need to be on hormone replacement. When we're
Yeah.
talking about being in the 70s and 80s, we probably most likely don't need it. But they left off the women who we're talking about today in
Yeah.
your 40s and 50s.
Right.
Those women were not even in the study,
Yeah.
in the trial. So that just kind of blew my mind. I didn't know that. When I was in pharmacy school, they that I guess it had probably just maybe the data had come out, and so even in pharmacy school, we learned, like, don't leave anybody on estrogen therapy for more than 5 years because then they'll get cancer. I mean, I actually told my mom that,
Yeah.
because that's what I was taught,
Yeah.
and to know that, gosh, my mom could have benefited from being on that longer. I mean, it did a disservice for sure.
So if women don't want to go to pharmaceuticals, go to hormones right away, are there alternative options, supplements, lifestyle changes, anything
Yeah,
else?
absolutely. So, because I do have a few people that don't want to do that first, and that's, totally fine. I always try to go with what the person wants, because at the end of the day, it's for their benefit. So, I like chase tree berry, which is a natural herbal supplement that can has been shown that it may help the ovaries produce progesterone. So
Yeah.
that's my top one. And that also sometimes can help with hot flashes. Also, L-theanine will help with hot flashes, and that's just an essential amino acid. So that's a really easy one
Okay.
to do, and it's really safe.
So people
And then
just take
the
that
other,
a day or twice a day or something like that.
usually just in the evening is what I'll
Okay.
dose it. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, with lifestyle change is decreasing added sugars in the diet. Weight loss too can be a benefit as well. And trying to reduce stress, learning how to do yoga, mindful breathing, that's critical, especially when we're talking about the hot flashes.
Right.
I know I can feel one come on when I am stressed. And it's crazy. And
Yeah.
it's something separate than what happens at night. So it's almost like an adrenaline surge that is also bringing up my temperature. So trying to learn how to balance stress is critical.
Yeah. And it was interesting what you mentioned about, the production of cortisol. Because if you remember the cortisol producing pathway, cholesterol to
Mhm.
cortisol, if you do produce a lot of cortisol, you're actually transforming or taking away the production of sex hormones
Yes.
because that cholesterol is being utilized in a different pathway.
Mhm.
So I wonder if that has something to do with it as well. You're decreasing, you have more cortisol in your system and
Mhm.
less progesterone.
Yeah, and you have less DHEA, which I don't think I mentioned earlier, which is basically at the top of the sex hormone cascade.
Yeah.
So all your other hormones are made from that. And that is something that I will test as well to see what that level is.
Right.
Because for many people, it may be so low that it's no wonder that everything else is low. So if you can bring that up, there are DHEA supplements out there, but I think a lot of it is more a lifestyle choice of really choosing to be less stressed and cortisol balance. And when you do that, your DHEA is going to come up. You don't really have to replete with that.
I see. Oh, that's interesting. And so making these lifestyle changes, taking some of those herbs like chasteberry that you mentioned, are like some of the basic things you can do to
Mhm.
improve yourself. But really, when you hormone repletion is like sort of like the gold standard. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like if
Yes.
somebody's amenable to it, that's the thing to do.
That's the thing to do because
Okay.
ultimately that's what's wrong. I mean, if you think about, well, what's the root cause of it?
Yeah.
The root cause is that the progesterone is low and that estrogen is chaotic. So really you get more symptom relief when you first start with the progesterone. And most people after several times meeting with me and I'm explaining all of that and teaching them, then they go to that. But I have had some that have just gotten such great relief with the chase tree berry that it's many months before they choose to do that.
Okay.
Uh, Eventually, that's the way to go.
Can you just get by without a hormone replacement? I mean, is there let me ask you this. Is there a reason to not give a woman hormone replacement therapy?
Probably conventional medicine would say cancer risk.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that would be the
Comorbidities.
fine line,
Yeah.
yeah, of what does this person wanna do? I have had I had one client who had breast cancer, and she, had decided to go on progesterone and started to feel better. But that was her choice, of course. And then I have a couple clients now that have a family history that are going to choose to go on progesterone and possibly even estrogen later, but they're not there yet.
Okay. So
But I think it would be cancer risk would be this is an iffy situation and
okay.
everybody needs to be involved in the care.
Okay. So aside for comorbid conditions, including cancer, is there a reason that women should not take the replacement therapy? Is there
I honestly don't think so. And mainly because of cardiovascular function and bone health and osteoporosis.
yeah.
So if we choose, like the women that after the Women's Health Initiative study came out, those that chose to not do any hormone therapy. And then, of course, you're looking at increased risk in heart attacks, strokes, and osteoporosis. So in my mind, it's for overall health,
Right.
um, and I don't wanna say all women should because it's everybody's choice to choose things, but I think it's beneficial, and I do think we're living so much longer,
Yeah.
that we're living many, many years without the protection of estrogen and progesterone. So if we can have 10 to 15 more years of those protection for our heart and for our bones, why wouldn't we? Why
Yeah.
wouldn't that be the choice? I think it's just people are still scared.
Now, is there a point where you would take that off, like, like a certain age where you're like, okay, well, let's see how you do without?
Yeah, maybe 70s, 80s, and to start to do just a very low dose because and still there would be some protective effects there. But definitely when we're talking 40s, 50s, and 60s, that, first 10 years of menopause, I think it's worth staying on. Especially if somebody's having really terrible hot flashes, night sweats. You wouldn't want to come off of that to just be miserable and not be
Right.
able to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about those women that are, younger, like, in their maybe early mid 30s or so, and they're like, oh, I think something's wrong. I'm having hair loss. Like, a lot of these symptoms could be just stress alone.
Yeah.
But do you check hormone levels if they request it in those cases?
Yeah, I will. I definitely will. If just to see if there's something going on. And a lot of times I found with especially in the 30s, if there is some hormone imbalance there, it is PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I think they're starting to rename or kind of reclassify that hormone imbalance state. But a lot of that has to do with our eating and insulin, high insulin levels, and a very high sugar diet.
Right.
So I find that women in that age group, it's the diet that we really, really have to address. It's the high insulin, and they'll often have very high testosterone levels too.
Right.
And that's kind of a clue that the ovaries are not producing progesterone, they're producing testosterone because of the high insulin.
Interesting. So there's a conversion that happens in that pathway that
Yes.
favors testosterone with high insulin levels.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that. Excellent. Well, this was a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate your time, Laura, and explaining these things. Was there anything else that I may have missed in terms of women's hormonal health?
No, I think we covered a lot, but I just want to say again, like, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of hormones, but don't be afraid of getting into the weight room
Yeah.
and learning how to do some of these basic movements, the squats and a bench press. I think women can lift heavy. You got to build up to it and you got to do it with proper form, and it'll be amazing once you get started. So,
Yeah, that's a great tip, and I would absolutely echo that. And that, lift weights, lift heavy weights. Don't be scared of doing so. I think there's certainly basic lifts that you mentioned, bench press, squats. I would include deadlifts and some kind of pull in
yeah.
that, like a sort of a horizontal vertical pull. Those are some basic, compound movements that
Mhm.
everyone should do, including women. We spoke about, maybe some of the dietary differences between men and women, hormonal differences, or hormonal issues with that pertain to women. So this was a very robust discussion. Really appreciate all the insights you shared, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, one more question. Actually,
Yeah.
the editor just cut to this question. If someone wants to get in touch with you and learn more, how could they do so?
Yes, I kind of on and off social media. I have a love-hate relationship with social media. But I do have a Facebook account. And so I'm on there. It's just Laura Roxanne Alexander. My you see my little face on there. That's a good way to do it as well. And yeah, that's pretty much all I do because I'm just social media averse, I guess.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.